Okay, welcome everyone to the Leading in Wyoming podcast. I'm here with Josh Fuller, who is the chair of the Leadership Wyoming Board, and we are coming to you live and direct from?
We're in, I almost said Lander, Pinedale for the opening retreat, the opening session for the class of 2026.
Yeah, class kicked off today. Grace will insert a beautiful view of Fremont Lake, which we've been looking over all day, and it's so lovely here. And we sometimes get requests to record conversations or speakers at Leadership Wyoming, and it always feels a little bit awkward to me to have a camera rolling like while we're talking to the class. And so instead of doing that, Josh and I did just give an overview kind of talk about leadership to the class. But we thought instead of doing that, we would just record a separate conversation where we talk about a few of the things that we discussed, and then also just what it's like to be in a leadership role at Leadership Wyoming right now. Josh, why don't you do a little introduction of who you are, where you come from, and how you came to be in this position?
Yeah, well, I'm Josh Fuller. I am the current chair of the Leadership Wyoming Board. I grew up in Sheridan, Wyoming, and went to school, got a couple of degrees from Laramie, and now live in Jackson. And by training, I'm an engineer, civil engineer, and the current CEO of Jorgensen Associates. And the class of 2019 was the Wolfpack, my class. Best class ever, of course, everybody knows.
Yeah.
But yeah, found my way onto the board after that, frankly, just because I couldn't get enough of the program and I wanted to stay involved.
Yeah, so yesterday we opened up with an exercise. For those of you who don't know, haven't been in a recent class, we have everybody bring an object that represents what does Wyoming mean to you, and then they kind of tell the story and everybody shares. And we were commenting yesterday that it's different items, it's different stories, it's obviously different people every year, but there's the same energy in the room. And so you've now seen a couple rounds of this. How would you sort of describe that energy?
It's remarkable. I think those sort of the intangibles of what that feels like are a big part of what makes the program so successful and why obviously it's so popular and impactful. It's sort of a combination of first day of school vibes. You assemble 45 usually complete strangers, and they've heard enough about the program to have some expectations, and the uncertainty of whether it's going to live up to those expectations is kind of cool. But partly, it feels like the start of a 100-mile race too, where there's this nervous energy. People have done the work to make it to the start line here, but never know how it's going to go. Yeah,
well, 100-mile race is a really good segue because some of the things we talked about this morning had to do with lessons that you've learned from ultra running. Josh has completed many long distance races in the hundreds now, he reported this morning. And a couple that you talked about that I'd love for you to just share with all of our alumni, but what it means to run 100 miles and some of the things that you sort of hold close to your heart in that training experience and also in that competitive experience that you think relate back to leadership, personal, professional, Leadership Wyoming.
Yeah, I think at first glance and maybe second glance, running 100 miles is absolutely absurd.
Third glance, even, I'd say.
But I think to me, it's so analogous to so many things that we face in our personal and professional lives, and the development that you can have during one of these events is pretty profound and impactful, and those lessons they're so applicable to our daily lives, again, both personally and professionally. I've done a few of these. Everything's relative for sure, and I'm like a solid middle of the packer these days. And but I really think, in what we talked about this morning, of the value of doing hard things and sort of expanding your spectrum of what you think and is objectively hard. And I think that's a really neat sort of application to, again, not only our personal lives, but leadership in general. The more often we get the opportunity to flex those muscles of doing hard things, whether it's a crucial conversation with a spouse or a very difficult conversation with an employee, the more you flex those muscles and have those tools at your disposal, I think the better we can sort of practice them. And self-selecting into running for a day and a half is a really quick way to
very efficient
to learn those lessons. And so I could go on and on about really the parallels that I find in ultra running. People would probably roll their eyes, but it's really not that hard. I do think from a physical perspective, if you have a base level of fitness, the crux of these events is sort of how you show up for yourself mentally. And again, we talked this morning about it truly takes a village. Often, right, like I'm the one with the number on and the bib on, but having the support of the community at large is really what makes this stuff possible. And so doing hard things in the community surrounding that, I think is what makes me keep going back for more. It is also a really interesting way, because jam-packed into that day and a half too, I really believe you experience the depth and breadth of the human experience. The highest of highs and the lowest of lows of every single human emotion that you can feel. That, like, happiness times 10, complete despair, anger, frustration, joy, camaraderie, love. It's all can get packed into this weekend without sleep.
Yeah, which is maybe true of Leadership Wyoming too.
Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah.
Sort of the full breadth of the human experience alongside these strangers, which every time we're in a classroom with the group for the first time, I'm just reminded that these people don't even know each other yet. And then we know what's coming, and all of you as alumni know what's coming, what it will feel like at graduation, in 9 months from now. But it is super remarkable that people show up and want to do that hard thing, whether they're introverted and coming to this first session is hard, or it's a challenging conversation to come. You shared, I forget the fancy title of it, but the Blue Dot study you shared with the class. Will you tell that story?
Yeah, I came across an article that was published in 2018 in Science Magazine, and it was based on some research by some fellows from Harvard and out of their sort of psychology department. And the article was titled Perception-Induced Concept Change. And what I find so interesting about that study is, so the mechanics of that study were they showed a bunch of study participants a bunch of dots on a page, and they varied in color from very purple to blue. And the participants were charged with identifying only the blue dots. And slowly, as each sort of repetition of the study with the same participants was repeated, they slowly began to remove the blue dots and ended up eventually with sort of a giant spectrum of purple. The interesting thing that they found was the percentage of identified blue dots remained the same whether or not there was any blue dots on the spectrum. And so, okay, what does this have to do with sort of our brains in ultra running and Leadership Wyoming? And I think what I really took away from that article, and I can't stop thinking about it because it's applicable everywhere, but in short, the fewer real, genuine problems or hardships that we face, the lower our threshold becomes for what counts as one. And so if we can sort of expand our sort of concept and our idea of what's hard or is what's meaningful, right? This applies to everything. This is the human experience that they seem to capture. Then all of a sudden things change. If in a physical perspective, if the hardest thing that you do in a week is go up a flight of stairs, well then all of a sudden that is the bookend of sort of hard things physically for you. Well, if you sign up for the Hard Rock 100 and spend 46 hours on your feet, 35,000 feet of climbing all above 11,000 feet in elevation, I think that is objectively a pretty hard thing to do. All of a sudden, going up and down the stairs really isn't that big a deal. And I think, yeah, there's so many different ways you can apply this. And perhaps the most fascinating thing about that study was even when they told the participants that they were going to start removing blue dots, they still identified them as blue when they weren't. And so even when we have sort of the background to know what's happening, our brain sort of takes over based on the prevalence of an event. And I think it's a really cool sort of analogy, and certainly worth a read.
What color is my shirt?
Oh. Blue.
I think a lot of times as leaders, we're building a toolkit to deal with adversity and to grow our capacity. And Leadership Wyoming becomes this great way to add to that toolkit. If you have all these resources, you have additional speakers who are giving you insight and wisdom, and facilitators who are pouring into you, and Hogan coaching, and all these things that are sort of expanding that toolkit and saying, like, go do hard things because you have what you need. And I think that you have to flex those muscles for them to not atrophy. There's no homeostasis. And I think in my own career, I have recognized you don't get to just do one hard thing and then sort of ride on the coattails of that. Like, you have to keep at it and keep at growing.
Certainly, and if we all can just collectively think about anything important or meaningful that we've ever done in our lives, it wasn't easy, right? Like the easy things, the easy days, the easy conversations, those aren't the things that stick with us.
Yeah, or define us.
So I think, right, but this is all relative too. On everyone has that, what they find sort of hard or uncomfortable, and so this isn't a binary conversation. I think the magic is in the continual pursuit of sort of mild to moderate discomfort.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because one of the stories, sorry, we've got some flies buzzing around here. One of the stories that I shared was actually about it's okay for things to look hard sometimes. And this is a lesson I've learned through the sport of rock climbing, that in my mind as a climber, I think that when I'm climbing at my best, it will be so graceful, so beautiful, awe-inspiring. And the truth is, it's ugly. It's pretty desperate, and it looks like I might fall at any point. And I think as leaders, if we put this ceiling on of I will only do things that are as hard as I can make look easy, we are really limiting what we're going to be capable of doing. And we're also telling our teams it shouldn't ever look hard. It should always look easy. And so I bet in your 46-hour race, some moments were a little bit ugly, and you kept going. And when you got to the end, the people who had seen those experiences, it was actually made more complete by knowing maybe the depth of despair that you felt at some point, and then knowing where you got to. And I think in leadership, it's not that we want to walk around being the victim or complaining about how hard it is. I don't think that's it, but being a little bit exposed or out in front as a leader and not making it look super easy or graceful, I think it's okay to have permission or give yourself permission to do that.
Yeah, and I right, the term is probably vulnerability of sorts, and which
it's so hard.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. And in my case, in the race that I just did a couple of weeks ago, it didn't go how I wanted it to go, and I spent all night puking my brains out.
That wasn't graceful?
No, there's not a way to make that graceful, and softly sobbing to myself about how miserable it was. And so, I think that's a really cool lesson. And I mean, the climbing analogy too is great. I've climbed enough to know that when you're pushing your limits on sort of that upper end of skill set, there's usually a lot of grunting involved, and maybe some choice words and sweating, and so I think that's the real side of a lot of often what we do as leaders. Maybe we have this tendency to, again, sort of shield others from it, but that's not the experience.
It's not real.
Yeah.
I think we've even been learning this at Leadership Wyoming, and maybe we'll transition now to a couple organizational things. I think I had a realization in last year's class, actually, that they kind of want to see us struggle a little bit, to have speakers or to have conversations that we don't know what's going to happen, and we don't exactly know where we're headed. And it's not just to see us struggle, but it's to see something real. And I think in the world of social media and YouTube videos where you can edit and everyone sort of looks perfect all the time, and so to see something real where I'm interviewing and I look nervous, the class actually gains a little bit of courage from that, of okay, well, if Mandy's doing something that's hard for her, maybe I could do something that's hard for me. And so it's sort of taken me back a few notches from feeling like oh, 8 years in, I'm like getting my wits about me, to more like every year we have to be growing as an organization and growing as individuals who are leading Leadership Wyoming as well. And so what are you proud of from your time on the board, now moving up into board chair for the last year? What are you proud of in the ways that Leadership Wyoming has evolved or has had conversations that you think are important?
Yeah, like to that end, and sort of practicing vulnerability in public, but maybe mostly we've had a lot of talk at the board level, and certainly you and I together, about avoiding complacency. And I really think one of the proudest sort of moments, or continual feelings that I have about sort of this organization and the program offerings and the list of facilitators, is that I really believe we are avoiding complacency. And I think that is done by a continual hard look at what we're doing and is there ways to improve it. Hard conversations about the bigger picture strategy and program offerings, right? With the Leadership Wyoming program and organization has a well-respected brand that is, a lot of people want to pull us in our organization in different directions, and so how do we be super thoughtful and intentional about which directions we pursue, while not sitting back and kicking up our feet, right? Like, this is the 25th class that, in Bill 25 years ago, who knows if he could imagine it's become what it is with over 1,000 alumni. And it would be so easy for us, sort of as board and staff, to just kick our feet up and rest on those laurels. And I don't think we are, right? We're spinning up new programs into the university, the Brio Collective, the joint relationship with the Business Council and the Academy. We are really and truly living out our strategic planning document and our core mission, vision, and values. And that feels great. It's fun.
Yeah, it is fun. And I think our board, following your example and the example of other board chairs we've had recently, is so active. And I think I take so much pride and have so much gratitude that our program committee reads every single word that every class member types every single month. And our selection committee reads hundreds of applications and sorts through every answer and has really thoughtful conversation about the class mix. And every single committee we have, our finance committee has been like through the roof active in the last year and a half of like getting things in good order. And I think when that's happening at every level of the organization, it's contagious. Everyone wants to contribute and wants to redefine things in the most beneficial and useful way to the organization. And I think you can run so fast you never stop to appreciate where you've been running. And I think this fall, when we get to have the 25th anniversary party, we'll get to have one of those look backs of, wow, we've come so far and all these people have been impacted in such amazing ways. But I tend to agree with you. I think there's no homeostasis. Either you're evolving and you're growing, or you're shrinking and you're dying. And I feel proud to have a team right now, staff and board, that is really committed to evolving and growing. And I have some new program ideas I wanted to talk to you about. My board is always like, slow down, Mandy. So we'll talk about this later. Yeah. Well, maybe to close out, would you share the headlamp story that you shared with the class this morning? Because I think it has a lot of relevance for a broader audience too.
Yeah. So in 2023, I got into the Hard Rock 100 for the first time, and it's sort of widely known as the Super Bowl of ultra running, and it's really hard to get into. I've been qualifying for almost a decade to run this silly race in Colorado, of which I just had the good fortune to get selected to run again this year.
Still silly.
Yeah. Sillier. But the first one was a pretty transformative experience for me. I'd been around the sport for sort of, I guess, nearing 20 years now, which is crazy. And I'd done dozens and dozens of these races. And I made a pretty fundamental error. And I forgot to bring a headlamp. And as with these things, you run through the night, and you try and you meet your crew at various aid stations along the way that they can access. And they had my headlamp at an aid station that I was 100% convinced that I was going to get to in the light.
No way you get there in the dark.
No way. And so, ergo, I didn't bring a headlamp. And so 30, 40 miles into this race, we climb up a 14,000 foot peak in the middle of the race. And at that point, my experience had gone fully off the rails and very sick to my stomach. And I sat in a little bit of a pity party on the summit of Handy's Peak, and it was dark, and I didn't have a headlamp, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And while I was a brief moment in wallowing in self-pity, two of probably the most sort of legendary hard rock runners, husband and wife team that had combined over 30 finishes of this race, they came up the hill and asked how I was doing, and I said, well, not so great. It was dark and I didn't have a headlamp, and we still had 5 miles to go to the next spot.
Probably downhill too, right?
Yep, very downhill, and where I would meet my crew and pick up my headlamp. And they said, well, no worries. She got in front, he got behind me. They both had headlamps, and they put me in the middle, and we spent the next hour and a half together. And I ended up finishing that year and well in front of those two. And that finish 100% would not have been possible without them. And so, again, all these analogies to life and leadership, and I think it kind of gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. But as leaders, I think often we are sort of either required or feel compelled to have our own headlamps, to shine our own light. And what my biggest takeaway from that evening with that couple was, yeah, that's true most of the time, but sometimes your batteries run out. Sometimes you forget your headlamp. And perhaps one of the most important skills that we have as leaders is not only to be the light for others, but to sort of be willing to and in a position to accept the light from others. And this year I ran it and I took the headlamp from the start.
Yeah,
so,
whole way just in case.
Yeah, lesson learned. But yeah, I think it remains to be like a pretty meaningful evening that I remember with those couples about shining the light.
Yeah, thanks so much. Well, thanks for being here and imparting wisdom, and thanks for sharing your leadership with this organization. And you're so committed and you show up in so many ways. And tomorrow they get to all have a reception at your house in the evening. So thanks for hosting as well.
Yeah, well, as always, thank you guys. This is pretty special, and I feel pretty fortunate to have a front row seat to what's next for Wyoming.
Awesome. Okay, thanks for joining us. We'll be back with another podcast soon.